It's hard to ignore the tension right now. Half the country feels like they've lost something, maybe even lost hope, while the other half feels relieved, but also maybe just a little wary, unsure of what's next for our divided states of America. Everyone's feeling it, that unease, that nagging sense that things are fragile right now, and one wrong move could send it all toppling down. At a time like this, I can't help but notice the similarities between how most people feel and how those disciples must have felt in that gospel passage we just heard. Here they are walking into Jerusalem in total awe of the temple there. This temple, which was the very center of their faith. It represented clarity and security for the disciples. And so here they are marveling at the massive stones and the impressive buildings of this essential structure. And then Jesus says, it's all going to come toppling down. You can imagine the fear and the confusion that the disciples must have felt when they heard this. And here we are today. Some of us sitting with similar fears and uncertainties. Some of us gloating and excited, but really, all of us, the winners and the losers, and the disciples in the gospel passage, all of us need to remember where our trust is actually rooted. Our trust should not be centered on big, grand buildings, nor should it be grounded in the outcome of an election. As it says on all of our currency in this country, in God we trust. We say that, but my, are we bad at actually living that out? To help me explain what I'm getting at, I need to give a little more detail about the temple that amazed the disciples in this gospel passage. You see, in Jesus' day, the temple in Jerusalem was a singular religious site. Things back then weren't like Hamden Avenue today, where you go past 5 churches to get to the one you attend. No. The temple was the one absolute center for Jewish festivals and rituals. It was the place to go to practice your faith most fully at that time. People believed that God was somehow more present in the temple than anywhere else. But this temple-centric mindset was something Jesus constantly tried to reform in people. A building is not the answer to the problems in your soul. A space like the temple with all its consolidated wealth and power is not going to magically fix everything for you. These are the lessons that Jesus was always pointing to. He was constantly telling his followers about the ways that the temple exploited the vulnerable and profited on people. He was constantly pointing out the hypocrisy and the self-righteousness and the pride that the temple fostered amongst its leadership. So imagine Jesus' frustration and despair when his own disciples walk into Jerusalem and look at the temple and express such awe and reverence for the very thing that to Jesus represented all of humanity's misplaced trust. Now, we don't have a temple mindset like this today, but we still fall into similar ways of thinking, don't we? We keep thinking that power or wealth or control will be what saves and heals us. If I get the promotion, then everything will be okay. If I lose the weight, then I'll be fine. If my candidate gets elected, then things will be as they're supposed to be. But putting our hope in promotions and weight loss and politicians is not able to cure the deep incompleteness in our soul. All of this transactional thinking is really just misplaced trust. Later on, Jesus is on the Mount of Olives with his inner circle, and they ask him what he meant when he said the temple would fall. And rather than answer the question directly, what Jesus says is, "Beware that no one leads you astray." In other words, be careful where you put your trust. It might seem like impressive temples or persuasive politicians are worthy of our trust, but Jesus' main point is that none of this will actually last. And in that same way, the emotional boost we get from a promotion or a raise, it won't last. The pride we get from losing weight and getting into shape, it doesn't fix all of our inner struggle. The candidate who's supposed to solve all of the country's problems, they never fully succeed. Everything that we put our trust in will ultimately fall short of providing us with what we're truly seeking. Author Donald Miller describes this whole phenomenon so well in his book, Blue Like Jazz. There's a lot of insightful stories and reflections in that book, but perhaps the best one is this strange cartoon that Miller inserts in the very middle of the book. It's the story of a rabbit who spends his whole life chasing after a carrot. And after a lot of heartache and struggle, the rabbit finally gets the carrot, only to discover that it's poisonous. And by eating it, he has brought about his own demise. Miller's point with this cartoon is that we're taught that if we work hard and never give up, we'll ultimately get what we want. But in actuality, putting all of this focus on getting what we want might actually be the very thing that's destroying us. We go chasing after the next fad, or the next best-selling book, or the next productivity life hack, thinking that any of these things will be a path towards an abundant life. But they aren't. In the end, these are all just paths towards our own ongoing incompleteness. So what are we to do? Our souls are fractured and broken. And since the beginning of time, we've tried to fix this brokenness by means of more power, more strategies, more money, more control. We've tried building temples and waging wars. We've tried grit and hard work. We've tried horoscopes and astrology and the Atkins diet, and none of it truly fixes the emptiness inside. But these moments of despair are actually the exact place where Jesus promises to show up. Jesus enters into the soul-level longing that humans have never been able to solve. He enters into that space and he transforms it. He flips all of our assumptions about how the world should work on their head. Just think about it. Jesus never held public office. He never personally wrote a book. He never had a podcast. In fact, one of the most memorable things Jesus ever did was get crucified. Nothing about this story seems to fit with our human obsession with power and control, but that's actually the point. For thousands of years, billions of people have found healing for their soul in this crucified Jesus, because his message is a complete 180 from everything else the world insists upon. Jesus' loving sacrifice on the cross unmasks the frivolous, demonic powers that we too often cling to. You see, in Jesus' day, the Holy Roman Empire was a global superpower, and Rome asserted its control by crucifying anyone who could potentially subvert that supremacy. In Jesus' day, the cross was a symbol of Rome's brutal, all-encompassing power and authority. But that's not why we put crosses in our sanctuaries or around our necks. No, for Christians, the cross has become a symbol that proclaims that deep humility and loving sacrifice are actually the pathways to new life. Jesus' cross shows us that deep, self-giving love is actually more powerful than Rome or anything else for that matter. We try to fix the terror within us by aligning with a politician, or by overcommitting to our careers, or by optimizing all the facets of our life, when the answer has always been Jesus and his path of self-giving love. Regardless of who you voted for, the fact remains that our true trust and faith is in Jesus. And our call for the next 4 years, and for the 4 years after that, and the 4 years after that, our call is to practice the humble, self-giving love of Jesus. There are people who are really scared right now and need an example of this love in their life. And as Christians, we're called to care for the vulnerable and to listen to those who are afraid. We're called to love even when we disagree, to love even when aggression seems more efficient, to love even when it seems hopeless. In a world divided by politics and filled with our endless striving for security and significance, our call is to trust in Jesus' way of love. This alone is the answer to our soul's longing. Because Jesus alone meets us in our fractured, weary state, and rather than offering judgment or power as the world knows it, instead Jesus provides us with a self-giving love and unshakable grace. Jesus takes our weakness and fills us with his strength. He takes our fears and gives us his hope. In him, we're gifted a love that shone stronger than the darkness of Rome's abusive power, a love that will continue to shine brighter than anything else we might foolishly put our trust in. Amen.